I'm glad you're here. Hope you feel as good as you look. Hope you'll be even better when you leave this morning. So our time will be well spent if you do. Our classroom looks a little different this morning, but part of that is due to the fact that Jacob and Mary Kate's rehearsal dinner was held in here Friday night, and all of the stuff in there got put in here, and so this room got rearranged, and when we put it back, the tables multiplied.
Look, I confess. I needed tables, so I went and stole some from the other room.
Well, you've divorced
Bar
me,
road.
so you're sitting
I
over
know.
there.
I'm sorry.
I mean, where's my papers at?
Hey, Blake helped me.
Maggie has always been one to operate with the act and get forgiveness rather than
I told them it was gonna happen, so.
I said, it doesn't bother me as long as I've got a
Look, y'all, my feet can't reach the ground in these chairs, and I need something to write on. So that's why it happened.
Well, I give you an A+, cause I know when the table and they want to.
I knew nobody was gonna get mad about it.
good for us to be together today, and always good for us to have visitors. Chad and Angela from West Virginia are visiting in Williamson. We're glad to have them with us. Beautiful state of West Virginia. Welcome to West Alabama. So always glad to have visitors in our midst. So I know that you will take and look over the sheet here. We have some birthdays on the back that we need to make mention of. This past week, actually, it was yesterday that Owen celebrated a birthday. How old was Owen yesterday? 20 years old.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
That's incredible. I remember when he was born.
Well, Bobby's getting old.
And then, well, I wouldn't talk because somebody else has a birthday tomorrow. It's Mary, so.
I resented was late getting there this morning.
Well, Mary, that's all right. It's happening to all of us. It happens to the best of us. What kind of announcements do we need to make mention of here before we open our class with a prayer and get started? Connor, always good to have Connor in here as well.
We're having a booty Wednesday.
Yeah.
We're gonna have another one Wednesday, huh?
Yep.
Well, good. We'll count that one on roll today, but I guess we'll just count that one after Wednesday.
Look, Blake's really disappointed that he's gonna miss your class for a while. He wants his name on the roll sheet. He wants that attendance award.
He's not having a baby.
Right?
Why is he missing? We hope everything goes well.
Thank you.
We're happy for both of you. Very happy. Anything else this morning? Nate?
Thankful the school's out.
We rejoice with you, my friend. Doesn't mean too much to me anymore, but it used to. Everything else good? Philip, word of prayer for us, please. You will.
Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity we can gather together and study a portion of your word, and may Glenn bring us a heartfelt message that we may be able to apply in our lives. And Father, we ask that you will guide us, lead us, direct us this day in Christ's name.
Thank you, Philip. Our current study, as you see on the board here, is a brief look. Now, this kind of study here could last into the years, so that's not our intent to do that. But we're talking about the New Testament church. And we're looking at it here from the standpoint of, can that church that we read about in the New Testament be found today? And so where have we been? We've been, as you see on the board here, a little timeline of things that will be important even in our discussion today. But we began our study spending about 3 weeks on 800 years of prophecy for the church. 800 years would find us back in the book of Joel. And in the latter days, we talked about that, Joel 2:28 and following. And come forward about 100 years to 700 BC, and you find the book of Isaiah and so forth. So we talked about all of that. Then we've talked about here in the last week or so, we've talked about the marks of that New Testament church that can be found in the New Testament. You look at who the founder is, and how often and what day of the week that church met on, and what they did when they met, and the leadership that was described of the New Testament church, and how that each congregation was autonomous. And we talked about the marks of the. Got to know what to look for if we're looking for the church of the New Testament. We've got to know what it looks like. So we talked about that. Now up here on the board you have the dates 100 here, and these are just kind of rounded figures because I'm using this here to kind of illustrate the close of New Testament inspiration. We read about the New Testament in all 27 books, or we read about the church in all 27 books in the New Testament. But all of that came to close probably around the year AD 96 when John finished the Revelation. That's what I think. Some people think it was written earlier than that, but I believe that the books of 1st, 2nd, 3rd John and the Revelation as well was all written near the end of his life in the 90s. So at any rate, roughly speaking, we're going to put an end to inspiration here around the year 100. Now today, in today's class, in today's discussion that we have here, the dates 200 and 300 will come into play a little bit. What happened after the close of inspiration over the next couple of hundred years. That's going to be part of our discussion today. Now another date that will be important, maybe even today, but certainly down the road, is the date 476, AD 476. Now what happened in 476? You guys remember? Where are you, Maria? You always come up with that. 476, fall of the Roman Empire. Okay, fall of the Roman Empire. You missed your chance.
I did.
To say it. And then another date here, and we won't talk about this much today, but in time to come, another very important date when you start looking for the church is the year 1517. Anybody want to say what happened in 1517?
Is that about the King James Bible?
No, that's good. That's a good idea. Martin Luther. That's excellent. Martin Luther's 95 theses that he nailed to the door of the church in Wittenberg, Germany, and that was on October 31st, 1517. Good point there. And then, of course, 2023. We're looking for the church today. Can it be found? And it certainly can. So let's talk about this a little bit. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're talking about, and this discussion here will last for a few weeks. When we look at the church from the 1st century to today, we talked about October 31st, 1517. I want to talk about this a little bit. Today, there's approximately 8 billion people on Earth. 8 billion people on Earth. Of that 8 billion, it's said that about a third of them, 33%, roughly, would call themselves Christian, or they would subscribe to Christianity. Okay, so that really includes a lot of different things. For example, the 3 branches of Christianity that I want us to consider here for a while is, the largest branch probably would be the Roman Catholic Church. But you also have a second branch that's called the Greek Orthodox Church. I really could have put another date in here somewhere around the year 1054. That was important as far as those 2 branches of Christianity is concerned. And the third branch is the branch called the Protestant branch. And that had to do with this date on year 1517. When Martin Luther and others during that time, during his lifetime, were leading a similar mindset. It was happening at different places all over Europe. But he's usually credited with the one that kicked it off. And that mindset was called a Protestant mindset because they were protesting something. We'll talk about that more later on. And that movement became known as the Reformation movement. Now, I didn't put it on the board, don't have it on the PowerPoint, but in time to come, I want you to differentiate. I want you to be able to distinguish between 2 terms. One is the Reformation, and the other one is the Restoration. Those are critical terms to differentiate, and we'll talk about that in time to come. But if we're looking for the church of the New Testament, we want to make sure we understand those two terms. Now, today's discussion here is going to center on this. Remember, now we're leaving the New Testament inspiration. We're leaving this, and we're going to start talking about the next 2 centuries here. And the thing that happened during those 2 centuries led to the church and government being mixed. Now let me throw this in, and this might be the most important thing I say today. God sanctioned 3 institutions. He sanctioned the home. It was a beautiful thing that was said yesterday in Mary Kate and Jacob's wedding about being married, becoming one, and establishing the home, etc. Man didn't come up with that. God sanctioned the home from the beginning. The second thing God sanctioned was government, civil government. We've talked about Romans chapter 12. We've talked about government in times past. Government. And the third thing the third institution he sanctioned was the what? The church. Okay, so the 3 institutions God sanctioned was the home, government, and the church. Now here's the important thing. There are 3 separate entities, and none of them are supposed to do the function of the other. The church can be a tool in helping you raise your kids, but the church can't take over what God intended to be the home. Those are 2 separate things. And in a very similar and important way is for the church and government. They're separate. Now, I want us to talk a little bit today about how these 2 centuries right here, following inspiration, the year 200 and 300, saw a mixing of those 2 institutions, government and the church. We're going to talk about that from 3 different vantage points. We won't get to all 3 of these today. We'll talk about the first one today, and that being just the geopolitical aspect of it. The politics and geography, the geopolitical aspects. Now, I doubt we'll get to it, but our next thought will be to go back to inspiration here. We're not going to leave it completely. Let's go back to inspiration and see what the Bible had to say about the events that we'll see unfolding. And then the third thing we'll touch on as we go through these, but it's very important, is the persecution. Now you remember we talked about in Acts chapter 7 and 8, what really led to the church leaving, scattering from Jerusalem into Judea and Samaria. What was it that caused that? It was persecution. It was the stoning of Stephen. Okay, and in Acts chapter 7, and that caused the church on God's timeline to leave Jerusalem and begin to spread out into the surrounding areas and eventually to all of the world. Don't you remember that's what we saw in Acts 1:8 when it said this is that's kind of the outline of the book of Acts. It'll be here in Jerusalem, then it's going to go to Judea and Samaria, and then it's going to go to the ends of the earth. So that was my plan, but it was persecution that did that. And incidentally, where did the first persecution come from in general? What group was responsible for the first persecution? Who killed Stephen in Acts chapter 7? Come on now. It was the Jews. Same group of people that killed Jesus. Okay? The first persecutions of the church came from the Jews. But that's not what we're going to talk about here, especially in these 2 centuries right here. Where did the persecution then come from? And actually, it didn't wait till the 100 to do this. It started with Nero in the late 50s and 60s. And Nero was responsible, the Emperor Nero was responsible for the deaths of Peter and Paul and many, many others. So when we talk about persecution here, we're going to talk about the persecution that's coming from the government, from the Roman government. How many of you have or have read, or maybe you have a copy of it in your libraries at home? It's a little book called Fox's Book of Martyrs. Anybody else have that? Okay, Williamsons do. Let me encourage you to do this. I think I gave $2 for my copy, so it's not going to break the bank. But let me encourage you to find a copy of that on Amazon or use bookstore or somewhere.
What's the name of it again?
The name of it is Fox's Book of Martyrs, and it's Foxe', Fox's Book of Martyrs. A lot of the persecution that we'll discuss when we get to that point will come from that book. Now there are others. Josephus talks a lot about it. Eusebius, the church historian, talks a lot about the persecutions. But when we get to that point, the Fox's Book of Martyrs outlines 10 great persecutions from the Roman emperors in basically this 2 centuries here. Although, as I said, the first one was one of the worst, and that was Nero, and he actually happened. He actually lived during the.
It's $5.40 on Amazon.
There you go. She's already
That's
taking
right.
orders over here. $5.40. So.
No, I had to add it to my cart so I wouldn't forget what it was.
Okay. Well, I know it's not a pleasant read. It's not a pleasant read, especially when you read about what happened beyond when you get over here in the Middle Ages, and here you read about what people did for just having the scriptures and for trying to copy the scriptures into English, John Wycliffe and others like that, and what horrible deaths that they were subjected to because of that. But it's a book of martyrs, so you would expect that. All right, that's where we're headed today. Now let's talk about this. Now what you see now on the screen here is a copy of the church. Well, it's a copy of the Paul's ministries here. But what you see here is a lot of the cities that's listed in the New Testament. And what I want you to see in this right here is this is basically what we see at the end of inspiration. Okay? Think of this at this 100-year AD mark, where you see all of these places here. And you've got the church at I didn't even show up on that, does it?
You're on the wall.
I know it, but no. I was hoping I could use my pointer. Okay, so you see all these places here. Now, let me ask you this. If you look at 1 Corinthians, the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, when Paul addresses them, he says something about to the saints, to the members of the church of God, which is at Corinth. Church, singular, at Corinth. Now, if you flip over a couple of books and you look at the book of Galatians, he begins that letter by saying to the saints, to those who are members in the churches, plural, of Galatia. You got the church of Corinth, you got the churches of Galatia. Now look at the map and tell me what the distinction is. We talked about the singularity of the church already. There's not a multiplicity of churches. There's one church. We find a multiplicity of congregations, cities. You know, when Paul wrote to Titus, he said he encouraged Titus. He left Titus at Crete, down here, the island of Crete. He said, I want you to appoint elders in all the cities, plural. Elders, plural. We'll talk about that later. But back to my question. Paul addresses the church at Corinth, and then the Galatian book, he addresses the churches of Galatia. It's a simple.
There's more
Corinth
landmarks.
was a city. Galatia
There's
was a
there's my answer. Okay. Corinth here is a city on this isthmus here that connects northern Greece and southern Greece. That would be Macedonia, and the southern part is Achaia. And Corinth is a city that's on, Corinth's a city. Galatia is not a city. Galatia is a what?
region.
Look at Galatia here on the map. It's in white. It's over there in what we would call modern day Turkey, Asia Minor. And it's a region. So the church at Corinth versus churches of Galatia. Now another example there is when the book of Revelation opens, it's addressed to the seven what? Churches of what? Asia. To the churches of Asia. Well, you see the same thing here, see? Asia there is not a city. Asia on the map, Galatia and Pisidia. And it's important we understand the difference between those two. So we'll talk about, matter of fact, you see on the map there, those seven churches of Asia, where we have Ephesus and Smyrna and Sardis, Philadelphia, Thyatira, and so forth. Those churches to whom the book of Revelation was written to in the short term, but they're really those seven congregations. If you were with us for the study of Revelation a few years ago, you know that those seven churches really are just representative. You know, we find Northport in that representation somewhere. So, anyway.
Well, that would be the only one, right? That would be the only letter to a region. All the rest of them are to
No,
right?
Galatians.
Right.
Oh, you talking about Paul's writings?
Right.
To my, right off the top of my head, I think it may be. Thessalonica is a city.
Ephesus.
Corinth.
Philippi.
And then you've got Philippi. Incidentally, if I don't change my mind, our next study in a couple of months when we finish this will be a study of the book of Philippians. I think we're ready for a good uplifting study, and so I'd like for us to do that. But I'm always open to suggestions or requests. So if anybody ever wants, to study something, let me know. Maybe we can work it in somewhere. Say one more thing. It's not really critical to the study, but before we leave this, Antioch. You see two Antiochs on there. One of them is in the region of Pisidia, Antioch of Pisidia, and the other one here is down here where it's in the region of Syria. Syria is not on the map because it kind of gets cut off. That's important. Remember when Cornelius is converted in Acts 10, and then in Acts 11, we find Christians were called, the disciples were called Christians first where? At Antioch, and that's Antioch of Syria. Now the reason I point that out is because for centuries, Jerusalem was kind of the center of religion as far as God's children are concerned, where you had to go to worship Jerusalem. When the Jews and the Gentiles both were welcomed into the church with the conversion of Cornelius in Acts 10, then it's by no accident that chapter 11 is where we find them called Christians first at Antioch. And it's my observation that the center of religion moved from Jerusalem then to Antioch of Syria. Why do I say that? Well, two reasons. Antioch of Syria is where Paul, his home base on the missionary journeys, that's where he always returned to. And the reason I think, this is my opinion, the reason I think is because Jerusalem was tied to Judaism so much. The Jewish religion was tied to Jerusalem. See, if you want a new start, which New Covenant was, then let's move it from there to Antioch. those are my thoughts, and I'll try to spare you with my opinion as much as I can. Okay, so now I do want to note one thing. I think I referenced Titus 1:5. Open your scriptures to Titus 1:5 here. Titus chapter 1. I want to make that reference that I said earlier. Paul writing to, this is one of the preacher letters, not pastoral epistles, but preacher letters. And down in verse 5, he says to Titus, he says, "For this reason I left you in Crete," I pointed that out earlier, "that you should set in order the things that are lacking and appoint elders in every city as I commanded you." So you got elders, plural, in every city that Paul is giving that commandment to. All right, now we said that's what we see at the end of inspiration here at the beginning, AD 100, at the beginning of the 2nd century. Now this is the map here. This is the same map, but if you'll notice, there are 5 arrows on this map. Now I've moved the map, I've moved the timeline forward 100 years. By the year 200 AD, we have 5 main cultural economic centers have developed. All right, and those arrows are pointing to those 5 cities. One is down in Egypt, Alexandria. One is Jerusalem. One is up in Antioch of Syria that we mentioned. Go around the coastline of Turkey there, Asia Minor, and you'll pick up Ephesus. And then, of course, the center of the Roman Empire. No surprise that that would be one of the five main cultural centers. You've got those 5 cities that have emerged by the year 200 AD. We're not interested in culture. We're not interested in economics and business and so forth. What we are interested in is what I'm about to say. By the year 200, and we read this in secular history, we don't have inspiration for all of this anymore. You got to go to Josephus, you got to go to Eusebius, you got to go to world history, you got to go to, I've got a book in my study at home that I need to bring and share with you sometime that's letters from early Christian writers. And it's actual letters that have been written like in the time periods that we're talking about here. I wish I could call to memory some of the names right now, but Polycarp and some of those that you've heard before. So we get this information, what I'm about to say, out of that. In 200, AD 200, we have references made to the Bishop of Rome, to the Bishop of Jerusalem, to the Bishop of Ephesus. All 5 of these right here. A little problem here. Because in the scriptures we read about the elders, plural. And then we come over here a scant century later and we're reading about the bishop being singular. So that's issues that we got to consider. Now, how did that happen? Well, here's my thoughts based on a lot of reading that I've done. So you got autonomous individual congregations under the oversight, episcopos, overseers, under the oversight of elders, plural. Let me stop right here. What would happen to Northport? There are 3 of us that serve, are blessed, privileged to serve you as your shepherds. No. That's an early bell. forget that. We might forget that other bell. What would happen to Northport if I and John Barra were to step down as elders?
There's no eldership.
What about Greg? He's still there.
There's no eldership.
That's the whole point. There's no such thing as a singular elder as far as authority goes in ruling over congregation.
Well, I've been told it takes a death certificate to resign. Don't plan on that.
I'll tell you this is a little personal note, okay? Y'all know I get personal from time to time. I was appointed an elder in 2004, and I carried a letter in my jacket pocket for probably 5 years.
Now you have all
Immediately after that, I resigned. Immediately. Just because. Okay. We'll just leave it, okay?
I didn't hear
So-
what he said. What did you say?
He
It
said
takes
you
a
couldn't
death certificate.
resign, but you can.
It takes a death certificate.
The point being is this, when inspiration, when the New Testament closes, we have cities, we have congregations that are being shepherded by elderships consisting of elders, plural. Now, what may have happened, and this is my thoughts based on reading, is within any of those elderships, it's natural for man to have egos and power struggles and that kind of thing. It's natural. We all have to fight against that. But within those individual elderships, just consider this as a possibility, okay? Within those individual elderships, maybe one began to emerge and was more influential and had a stronger voice than the others. And in time to come, a new title was given to them. He's the bishop. So you've got elders and you've got the bishop. You've got one that's kind of over all of them. And then he begins to branch out, and there are other congregations around in this diocese. That's a key word. What's a diocese? It's just a district, okay? It's just an area. So you've got a diocese here, and you've got an area that this strong elder here begins to oversee more than one congregation. So he becomes the diocesan bishop, if you will. In time to come, just a few years, well, let's see. We're going to get all of these folks together, and then what comes out of that is what's called a metropolitan bishop. All right? You see that happening, see, because of the 5 areas here that you see. These are 5 large metropolitan areas. And so you have that begin to emerge. Now, in time to come, we're not ready to talk about this just yet, but in time to come, even within all of that group of patriarchs or bishops, even with all of that group, one eventually emerged from that group, and that was the one that served over Rome. Now, why would the one over the city of Rome have more influence than the others? That's the capital of the Roman Empire. That's where the authority is. That's where the emperor is. And so we can see the seeds there being planted for these.
Glenn, I feel like you just 100% described Catholicism.
Well,
And those
I'm
terms are
100% describing
those
what's
terms are
happening.
still used today, though, especially with the Catholic Church.
We're going to talk about a little bit of all of that because that's kind of where the mix of all of this is going. So how did all this happen? Well, it happened because of what you see on the board here, mainly, and that is the office of elder, just as I described. I gave you these terms here earlier. That's used to refer to an elder? Is it error? Is it doctrinally wrong to refer to an elder as a bishop? No. The bishop here actually comes from the Greek word episkopos, which is overseer. And so to refer to an elder as a bishop, that's scriptural. I emphasize A. Let's don't start doing B. And then presbyter, remember that comes from the Greek word presbyteros, which has to do with age mainly. And then you have the term shepherd, which comes from the Greek word poimeno, which has to do with feeding. So in different areas in the New Testament, when you refer to an elder, it's referred to it with different Greek words because of the different functions. An elder is responsible to feed the flock. Feed the flock over which the Lord has made you an overseer. That's part of being a bishop and a shepherd as well. So different functions of an elder. That's where the problem, though, really began here, as we see once inspiration closes. And we're not going to get to it today, but when we start looking at the scriptures, there's several of them. When we start looking at the scriptures that really describe what's about to happen, you'll see it. You'll see that it was almost just like that. It followed the plan there. So let's look at Acts 20 and verse 17, beginning. We visited this already, but now with what we've talked about today, we may have kind of a new appreciation for what we see in here. In Acts 20, verse 17, from Miletus, remember on the map there, he sent to Ephesus, the city, and called for the elders, plural, of the church, singular. We talked about that already. Elders here is the word presbyteros. That's one way of referring to them. Usually it has something to do with age. But go down to verse 28. As he's addressing this group of presbyters, he says, "Take heed, therefore, to yourselves and to the flock, among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers." See all those terms here? Overseers, to shepherd, poimeno, to shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. For I know this, that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among the church. Is that what it says?
No.
It says what?
Among you.
Among you. Who's he talking to?
Elders.
He's talking to a group of elders. And he says, take heed. Watch. Because after I leave, he says, savage wolves are going to come in among you, not sparing the flock. Also from among yourselves, men will rise up, speaking perverse things, to draw away the disciples after themselves. Does that not fit what we talked about? That you have personalities here that start out as elders, and maybe everything is good to start with, but they begin to have too much power and too much authority, and begin to say things that's unscriptural, and begin to draw away disciples after themselves. Yeah, fits perfectly. Let me just throw up here these things as we conclude our class. We're about out of time. So, these persecutions that I talked about earlier, we'll talk about them individually. They grew worse and worse from here all the way to about here. The persecution now is coming from the government, and in particular, some of the emperors of the Roman Empire. Gotta hurry. Let me say just 2 or 3 quick things, okay? Then came a Roman emperor around 300, okay, named Constantine. Now, Constantine, it said, was converted to Christianity. Was he truly converted to Christianity or not? I don't know. I don't have to judge that. God will do that. But I know this, he began to do things that was good in a way. In a way. Constantine in the Edict of Milan in AD 13 was a creed that said the Roman Empire should treat Christians benevolently. And even more important was the Council of Nicaea. We need to come back and talk about this more in time to come, because that's when he pulled together a bunch of the bishops together, and the Council of Nicaea in AD 325 decided to stop all persecutions against Christians. But it was the Emperor Theodosius on February 27, 380 that really put the icing on the cake, because he made a decree at that time that made Christianity the official faith of the Roman Empire. In 380, about 100 years before the Roman Empire fell. Well, Glenn, is that not good? Is that not good? To make Christianity the official faith of the Roman Empire? Why is it not good? Remember those three institutions we talked about? They're not to be, don't get them mixed up. But that was the beginning of, and being the government and Christianity being mixed. So about 100 years, and then we had the fall of the Roman Empire, and then the power shifted from the Emperor of Rome to the Roman Church at that point. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, and that'll open up some other doors for us. But thank you for your kind attention today and for being with us.
Okay.